How's it going, everyone? And welcome once again to another episode of Animal Talk Podcast in collaboration with SACA, the South African Animal Keepers Association. My name is Ryne.
And my name is Ayrton. How's it, Ryan? How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And as always, excited for another episode
Woohoo!
of our Animal Talk podcast.
Episode 47, and a link on to our last episode from last week.
Yes, last week we were chatting about clicker training. I think I got a little bit too excited because there was so much information that we got to unpack that we were like, okay, we need to just do another episode and carry on from there. Because yeah, as we mentioned, there's, when you start talking about a topic that you know quite a bit about, there's just so much to unpack and so much information that we have, and it reminds us of stories that and lessons that we've learned from the animals that we've gotten to work with over the years. And it's really nice to not only just unpack all that knowledge, but also sometimes just go back and share some of those stories as well.
Yeah, I think everybody likes a little story here and there, but sometimes, as I'm sure the listeners might know, we try and keep the podcast to a certain length, and sometimes I have to sort of like, we've got to start finishing off, otherwise we're going to go into an hour podcast. So yeah, we're moving into this one now, and now we can spend a little bit more time talking about. I think we were going to talk about shaping behavior, so we can jump straight into that.
Yes, indeed. So if you haven't listened to the previous episode, please go back and start there, because otherwise this part might not necessarily make all that sense to you. So start at the previous episode and then follow on with this one. But basically, we are now getting to the point where we're assuming that the animal we're working with knows what a clicker is, understands what a bridge is, and we're quite comfortable using that clicker, and we know how it works. We know with our timing how precise we need to be. And now we're going into the fun part. You always have to do all the kind of the groundwork, which is really charging the clicker and getting it to actually have value and have meaning. But once the animal understands what a bridge is and understands what that clicker is, that's kind of is really where all the fun begins, because now you have
The world is your oyster.
literally you have this really cool and effective communication tool that you can really use with just about any animal that you want to. So when we talk about shaping behavior, we are talking about starting off with a particular behavior. Maybe it's easier to kind of, once you've really got a few behaviors going, but you want to start moving into maybe shifting that behavior into a specific direction. You might want the animal to present a specific part of their body for health or medical checks. And that's really where I think there's a huge benefit in terms of clicker training and really using the clicker effectively, because there's so much that you can do when it comes to shaping behavior. So that's really what we're going to be talking about. And just to give you a very basic example, so if Ryan's going to be my animal, and I'm going to ask him or try get him to do different behaviors or present different behaviors to me to kind of
Squawk, 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 squawk. Oh, I don't know what animal I am, but I just decided I was going to make a noise while you were talking.
Okay, that's a least reinforcing scenario, and we're going to move on. That is not a desired
Well
behavior.
done, I'm not squawking anymore.
And as you can see, I didn't bridge for Ryan there because I didn't actually want him to do that behavior. So if you can imagine, Ryan is target trained. So I've got maybe a ball on a stick, and he understands that whenever I present that target out to him, I want him to extend his arm and touch the target. And what I'm going to then do is I'm going to bridge using my clicker, and I'm going to reinforce. But now what I can start doing is I can start moving that target around. So he might have to reach further out to reach that target. the target might be on the opposite side of his body, so he might have to actually fold his arm over his other arm. And this is really kind of the basic concept of shaping behavior, because what you now have the power to do is to mark the desired behavior that you're asking for. So you can use that target pole, and you can really just shift the animal wherever you need them to. You can introduce maybe a second target pole if you're asking them to present another specific part of their body while staying stationed in a specific position. And again, using that clicker as a bridge. And I mean, there's so much, in the zoological industry, there's just so much that can be done, from voluntary blood draws to, presenting an animal, presenting their mouth so that we can open their mouth so that you can see inside, presenting their eyes so we can administer eye drops. Really, the opportunities when it comes to this are actually endless. I've seen some really cool things with birds as well, like macaws, training them to station to an area while we can either file down their beak or their nails. And even some voluntary behaviors as well with macaws, which has been quite cool that I've seen recently, is they literally have a Dremel, which is what we often use. We've used it with the penguins as well to file down their beaks, and basically teaching the bird to present their beak onto this machine so that it can file down their beak. And what's really amazing in that whole concept is that the animal has every bit of control in that situation. We're not forcing them to stay stationed so that we can file down the beak. It's literally a bird coming over, presenting its beak to us, and when they're not feeling comfortable, they can move their beak away completely on their own. So I think there's really, it's one thing that's really, really exciting in the world of animal training. And when you see, the amazing work that's being done, it really, I think, just drives you to try and implement similar things in your animals that you work with.
Yeah, there's some really cool behaviors you can do. And of course, giving a voice and control, as we've spoken about in previous episodes, is so, so important. Having that animal have a choice to either move away or come and be part of a training session is so important, and actually I find can be more reinforcing sometimes than the reinforcer itself, which creates a situation where the animal wants to be a part of the training session because it's been given a voice, and it's extremely powerful. But that's going to take me down a whole nother dark hole talking about that. So let's carry on with shaping behavior.
Yeah, I'm like, don't go there.
No, I'm holding back.
It's really an effective way of utilizing animal training and positive reinforcement. And if we go to a very basic level with your pets at home, for example, with dogs, I know a lot of pets really don't enjoy getting their nails trimmed. So, using a clicker as a bridge, and then simply presenting that nail clipper as it can be a visual trigger for a lot of animals. So even just presenting it to the animal, not going anywhere near the nails, but presenting it and putting it in front of them so that they can see it, and then bridging to tell them, you're doing a great job. And then slowly using approximations, which is maybe, I think, the next thing we have to talk about, and move that closer and closer, and until it's actually touching the dog's paw, but still not trimming. So there's so many things that we can use a clicker for, and it really comes back to that communication, that clear communication that it allows us to have, and also building that trust element, which obviously training. So when we talk about approximations, we're talking about having kind of a set structure on, this is where you are, this is the goal, and where the behavior needs to be, and what you want as the end result behavior, and how are we going to set goals in order to get from point A to point B in terms of the behavior that we want. And I think I mentioned it in previous episodes when we talked about animal training, but what I find so invaluable is to literally just sit and create an animal training plan for that particular training session or that particular animal that you're going to work with. Set out your goals, set out how you think you're going to go about training this behavior with all the different steps and the different approximations. So if we give a really simple example of maybe you want to get, a dog to give you a sit behavior, you're going to start out very basic by having the food in one hand. You are going to hold it above the dog's head to get the dog to lift its head more vertical to you, and then pushing your hand back, so that then gets the dog to shift its body position, and that should encourage the dog to essentially sit. You might need to aid by, putting a little bit of pressure with a hand on the dog's back and gently guiding the dog into position, and then, clicking and reinforcing depending on what level you are with that animal. So that whole process, you can write out in the training plan, and you can have your set approximations of, okay, today we're just focusing on this. Tomorrow we're going to be focusing on that. And quite often your training plan gets thrown out the window because, as we said, animals often, pick up on things a lot quicker than sometimes we give them credit for, and they offer us behaviors. But it's really good when, things don't necessarily happen that way, that you've got a set structure, and you can say, okay, we are on this point today, but we didn't achieve that. So we're not going to move on to our next approximation until the animal's comfortable. Once that's achieved, we can go on to the next step. So just by planning it, and I think sitting and, writing it down forces us to actually think about all the things we need to take into consideration. And especially in a zoological setting, if you've got a team, working in that training environment and also having to train. Me personally, I prefer when we're training initial behaviors that it's one or two trainers that are working with that animal one-on-one until that behavior has been achieved. And then you can start adding, other trainers into the mix so that they can already take over a trained behavior. But it doesn't always happen that way. And not all facilities allow for that. Because often we have staff that need to be off, and other staff need to do the training in your place when you're not there. So also just sitting and having that training plan down and really getting your team involved, and just thinking outside the box on how you can achieve a certain behavior, what approximations you need. And that will give you a really good insight as to how you're going to shape that behavior moving forward, and what are kind of the key points you need to achieve and shape on to get to your desired behavior, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with training plans. So hear me out.
I love them. No.
As good as training plans are, and I love that Ayrton loves his training plans, but I use them and sometimes don't use them. It depends on the situation. So in a team setting, 100% definitely going to need a training plan, because everybody has to be on the same page. And the only way to get everybody on the same page is to have a page that everybody's on looking at in a physical term. So, yes, training plans are important when you're working with the team. But if you're just working one on one with an animal and you are progressing, I do have an idea of the training plan in my head and understanding the animal's behavior, but I don't really have a set thing that I've written down to sort of do it, because I know that, just what you said right at the end, things are going to happen that may not be something that I planned for. And every animal is going to be different. So I may be training, let's just say, for example, a couple of years ago, I was training two spotted eagle owls, and both of them are the same species, but they're completely two different individuals. And I had an idea of exactly how I was going to get this spotted eagle owl to fly to the glove and the approximations to get it to do that. But I could not use that same method with the other spotted eagle owl because it did not behave in the same manner. I had to use other techniques. So, yes, training plans are great, but also remember, be a little bit more fluid with your training plans. And what I like to do with a training plan, if it is in a team situation, is I'm always revising it. And because new things come up and I think about new things, or I see a new behavior or something that that animal did, and I'm like, I didn't think about that. Let me just write that down. Maybe it's something that might come up at a later stage. So they are good sometimes, especially for recording behaviors and being able to go back and look and see what you did in the past, but also be, like I said, a little bit fluid with them and try and be a little bit more lenient on yourself and the animal, and also move at the pace of the animal. I think that's another important point, is they have their own pace, and sometimes their pace is a lot faster than ours, and you don't realize it until you realize it, and then you're like, wow, I didn't realize we skipped 5 steps and now we're in step number 19 already. So it's important to just always be open to those things.
Yeah, I think, have that training plan, but like as Ryne mentioned, like don't be fixated on it. I think that's really important. I think in the industry we get like different types of people. You have someone who wants everything black and white and it needs to be, with a training plan, and that's how we're going to do it, and that's the steps, and that's how we're going to follow it. And then you have others that are just watching behavior, having fun with the animal and trying to mark and shape as they go along. And I think in the industry, there isn't, nothing is black and white. As we mentioned, all animals are different. All animals learn at different rates and paces and in different ways. So I think it's also important to just like have a bit of both. And yeah, I definitely find in the team setting, it's a lot easier to have a training plan. But as you also mentioned, like you have to revise it all the time. It's literally like a husbandry, like SOP. Like as we know, as we know better, we need to do better. So I think it's really important to have that in the back of your mind. I like to do it just so that I've got some clarity and I know kind of the rough idea and routes that I'm going to go. But as we mentioned, it doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to go. So also just keep that in your back pockets, and don't stress out too much if it isn't going according to your training plan either. I can give you a fun example about a training plan that I had created very, black and white, and was very proud of it, was going to implement it. And it was training our stingrays in one of our large displays to come from the bottom, which is 6 meters down, and then coming up to the medical pool, which is 6 meters up from the bottom. So from the previous episode, you would have heard the story about the stingrays in the smaller exhibit, and how I was struggling to get them to come up to the surface to feed. And I mean, that particular exhibit isn't even, it's just over a meter deep. So in my mind, approaching, this new challenge was that the biggest challenge in this exhibit is going to be these rays not understanding that they need to come all the way up. It's not just, 1.5 meters they need to swim now, but these bigger animals now need to move 6 meters. And I'm already struggling with the rays in the smaller exhibit. So how are we going to do that? And I had this whole like idea and program written out, and how we're going to basically start at the bottom on scuba and use the target and move it up the wall in said approximations, and everything was going to work out great. I think I was preparing to get into that exhibit, and I wanted to just see if I do put the target in to the medical pool and hang it over the side of the wall, to see if maybe they would come a little bit up the wall towards the targets, if we could get any of that behavior happening. And I put the target over the side, and within 5 minutes, the rays were in the medical pool. So didn't need to use any of my approximations, didn't need to train them to come up the wall. They were already so well trained on their target that they knew wherever it is, we need to come to it. So yeah, just always also be prepared for the animals to surprise you. Now we can just go a little bit back. We've gone over approximations and kind of how to set them up, how to set up a very basic training plan, and just go a little bit backwards again into shaping, and just explain it a little bit more, in case some of our listeners are still a bit unsure and a bit confused. So I think what you need to understand about shaping is you really have to be present in those moments when you're working with those animals, because as we mentioned already, they're going to be offering you things. Okay. When you've got high value reinforcers, I know with myself, with chuckles, if somebody has a bag of chuckles, I'm going to hang around them. I'm going to chat to them. No, I'm not that bad. But
I disagree. I think you might be that bag.
if your reinforcer is like of a really high currency and it's something that the animal really, really enjoys and really wants to get, they're definitely going to start, trying to get those reinforcers any way they can. So I've seen a lot with dogs. Once they've got a few behaviors down and you've got, a really nice bag of treats that they really enjoy, they start offering you all these things. They start sitting, they start giving you a paw, they might start talking. So they're offering you all these things because they're trying to work out, what do you want me to do? And that's the absolute perfect example of when you would want to shape, because you're engaged, the animal's engaged, and it's really just watching what they're presenting to you to try capture those behaviors and then working on that behavior and shaping it. So for example, it might be, if we go back to our previous example, we've started teaching a dog to sit, and it's in the sitting position. And, now we've put on cue, which means it has been associated with a verbal cue. So every time I say sit, the dog then does the desired behavior. We bridge and then we reinforce. So now if I want the dog to give me its paw, we can shape that behavior next. Okay, so what we might be asking for is the dog to be in a sitting position. We're asking them to stay in that position. And then the easiest thing to do is actually either touch or pick up the dog's paw, say paw, and then reinforce and give food. And then slowly but surely moving that hand contact, it's similar to using a target pole, further and further so that it's delayed. And that's giving the dog the opportunity to also bridge that gap between the verbal cue and what you've been asking it. And it's amazing to see how quickly, like, training your dog to give paw can happen. It can literally be within like 1 or 2 training sessions, especially when you have a clicker, because it's so, it's like so easy, because it's a lot of repetition, but it's also you physically kind of manipulating. So you might be using, touching as a cue as well. So touching the paw or tapping the paw lightly. And the dog will first be slightly confused because obviously, we've never done this behavior before, but you will see the amazement of when the dog slowly but surely starts to understand what you are asking. It might be small paw movements that you're getting. It might be the slightest movement, of a paw. You might see the dog's paw slightly move. What you're going to do is you're going to bridge and you're going to reinforce, because even the slightest movement is what you want, because you want that paw to move, come up, and then be placed in your hand. So any kind of movement towards the goal or the desired behavior that you want, you're going to reinforce and bridge and then reinforce. And that's really, really important to understand. And that's why it's important for you to understand and also try and train only one behavior at a time. So if I'm working on that desired behavior of the dog giving me its paw, I'm only going to be focusing on that during that training session. It might be giving or offering other behaviors. So it might be trying to talk. It might be trying to lie down. It's really important that you don't reinforce that, because you're trying to have a very clear communication about the desired behavior that you're asking for, and that can lead to confusion. So I think it can be sometimes quite overwhelming, because you might ask for a desired behavior and then you get another really cool behavior and you're like, oh, I want to capture that. And I quickly bridge and I reinforce, but it doesn't help the training long term. So definitely just focusing on that one kind of desired behavior, and then working any movement that is working towards that that desired behavior would be bridged and then reinforced. And I think that's really important to understand.
Very important. You said two words there, and we need to break them down now because we're talking about shaping and there's capturing. What is the difference between those two?
So capturing is basically when a behavior is already occurring. So, if a dog spins around in a circle and you haven't asked for that desired behavior, when we talk about capturing, we talk about then clicking and reinforcing, because you're trying to capture the behavior that the animal's just presented to you. Whereas shaping, you are really kind of breaking down a particular behavior into really small kind of steps. And any step that you see the animal presenting to you when you are asking or cueing that behavior, any step that you see that is, on that same path towards your end goal, your desired behavior, that would be shaping. I don't know. Do you have a better definition for our listeners on the difference between those two?
No, I think you actually hit the nail on the head there because when you were talking about the two, they were sort of merging together. So I just wanted you to kind of bring it out a little bit so that we could talk a bit more about the two differences. I think it's important to also remember that a lot of people are trying to increase behaviors in a way where they are adding on behaviors. And I think that's another challenging part that a lot of people's minds can't get around. Because if you had an animal, I'll put you on the spot, Ayrton. If you had an animal and you were training it to do multiple behaviors in a row, what would your starting behavior be and what would your ending behavior be when you are training?
So if you're training a sequence of behaviors, what I would do is I would start with, if it's going to be a sequence, I would start with the behaviors that you already have down. And then I would work away from that to the less known behavior, if I can call it that. Because your initial behavior, you want it to be engaging and something that they're familiar with. So if you're training a whole sequence of behaviors, I would start with the more familiar one. If it's a sequence where the behaviors are quite difficult in that sequence, I would also start with the kind of the end behavior that you want and then train it the other way. I don't know if I've explained this right or if I've just confused everyone.
No, you're good. I think the best way for my brain to work with it is to say backwards shaping. So you can do forward shaping or backward shaping. And in my mind, when you are adding behaviors on, for me, I would be backward shaping because I will train the last behavior first. So the behavior I want to end on, I would train first. And the reason why I do that is because I want the highest reinforcement value on that behavior, because then the animal is working from, as we're shaping backwards, it's working towards that behavior where it's getting the highest feeling of accomplishment and behavior. And that's why, as I add on, I move backwards towards the beginning where I want the animal to start to end on the behavior I started with, if that makes sense. Or I've also maybe just confused everybody.
I don't know. Do you have maybe a practical example? I think maybe if it's put into example form, that might be easier for the listeners to picture it.
Yeah, I do. I have a perfect one. So let's work on what I know, and that is having, for example, a corvid, a crow working in a show. The behavior we train the most would be a crating behavior because we want to be able to move that bird to certain areas for release onto an open area wherever we're going to be working with it. So the behavior that we want strong is the crate behavior. So going into the crate. So that technically can be the first or the last behavior because you're getting the bird to come into the crate from its enclosure to move, but also at the end of its whole routine and things that it's done, behaviors it's done, it's coming back into the crate. So love crate training, crate, good, positive place. So that's my end goal. is
going to
for
be our next episode.
yes, our end goal is for it to go into the crate. Now I wanted to work on something. So we've got the crate behavior. So we're going to call the crate behavior 4. So that's going to be number 4. And we're going to work towards number 1. So number 3 is a behavior where I want the bird to go from this position to the crate as it's going off out of the area where we want it to work on. So we're training that behavior now. So we're going 3 to 4, 3 to 4. Then we're going to add 2 in. So 2 is going to go from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4. So we're going to go 2 to 3 and then to 4. So you're continuously going and you're increasing it again. And then you go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4. So that's backwards shaping. So you're increasing the behavior going forward, and you want it to start at number 1, end at number 4, but you're training it from number 4 to number 1. I think that made it sound a bit easier to understand.
Yeah, I think I've got now that we're speaking about this, I've actually got a physical example, not that I trained, but something that I had watched. I'd watched years ago. The SeaWorld parks used to have a really cool like animal show called Pets Ahoy, and it was also Pets Rule, I think was the show names. And basically they had all these domestic animals like cats and dogs and birds and mice that they had rescued from rescue organizations. And they would, a lot of the show was basically these animals doing all these behavior sequences, but you didn't see the trainers, which was really, really cool. And linking onto your example was they would, how the show would always start was this it would start with this little mouse coming onto this set, and it would basically do all these different behaviors before going into a separate area backstage, and then they would let the cat out, and it would almost make the sequence like the mice goes through the set and then the cats and then the dog. So it was a really cool sequence. But like you mentioning with that sequence, the sequence where they would start training was the mouse going back into its crate, back of house, and then moving that behavior. So shifting it. So then putting steps before it has to go to its crate. So then our second or our third point is the mouse going up the stairs and going into the crate. And then adding a little rope that it has to run over would be your second point. So now it has to do the rope, the stairs, and into its crate. And then the first behavior was coming out onto stage, going to the rope, going to the steps, going to the crate. So that's what we talk about when we talking about like shaping, specifically in sequences, and where you would start and where you would end up. So we're starting with, that most familiar and the most reinforcing one. I mean, the ultimate goal in both of these examples is you want the bird to go into the crate, you want the mouse to go into the crate, because that's where you need that animal to shift to, and then building on what happens before that desired and comfortable behavior. So that's a more in-person one, more detail so that our listeners can understand.
Yeah, well done on that. But talking about ending, we need to end and maybe think about talking about crate training in our next episode, because that is something that could really go down a whole nother rabbit hole as well. So we're now going to end on the crate, and we will discuss the crate training in the next episode. How's that?
That sounds great.
I see what you did there. Well, if you do have any if you do have any examples that you would like to share with us of your shaping and how you shape behaviors, please let us know. You could either email us on animal.talk201@gmail.com, or you could get hold of us on our social media.
Yeah, sure. Reach out to us on Animal Talk Podcast _ZA. That is our handle. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Please go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go like our videos, go comment on our posts, and help us to, really spread the word of Animal Talk Podcast. And yeah, thanks again for tuning into another episode.
If you comment on our YouTube channel on one of our podcasts episodes, we will give you a shout out in one of our episodes. So make sure to comment, discuss that podcast with us, and we'll give you a shout out in one of our episodes. If you do have any information that you would like to know about SACA, which is the South African Animal Keepers Association, it's down in the description at all of our podcasts. And we also like to thank eRadio for allowing us to be on their airways on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m. But from myself, animals are our passion.
And remember that our quality of care is their quality of life. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye. Hello?
Did I drop? Hello?
So you've
I don't
been
know, because you sounded like a bit of a robot towards the end of your speaking.
Yes, you have been
Have I
sounding like a
been
robot
coming
quite a
and
bit.
going?
Yes, you're like, and then you disappear, and then you come back, and I hear half of what you're saying. So yes, it's been a little bit robotic.
But this was the best part.
No. I think it's recorded fine. But did you hear what I said?
No.
Oh, moment is gone.
No, I didn't. Damn it.
I said, wow, you see, they were way ahead of you before you even knew it.
Yeah. Ahead of their time.
Okay, pull yourself toward yourself.
What rays of brightness.
Where were you?